Actually, we're kind of fortunate in that we don't have a lot of changes in the revenues and the expenditures. So I think we're going to just try and recap those. And then if anybody wants to add comments or ask questions, we'll hit that up. And then we'll move on to the stuff that I was so disappointed we couldn't talk about last time. So when we look at revenues, the five main categories that we have, the first one is road and bridge intergovernmental transfers. And that one right now is off pace by about $647,000. And Mike's going to get to that right there. So you can see that that's that orange 31.7%. And so that's the current pace that they're at. And our operations pace is 37%. But when we look at last year at this time, these funds were only at 14.4%. So we're actually doing a lot better in our collections, and we didn't have a problem with the overall volume by the end of the year, and we don't think we're going to have a problem this year. It's all special road projects, collections from the state. Crystal, is that good enough?
Perfect.
All right. Yeah. All right, everybody take a breath. Okay, there's one now. Two is sheriff other revenues. And right now it's about $579,000 behind pace. And it's at 32.2% compared to the 37%. Last year at this time, it was 34.5%. Okay. So this is mainly federal boarding revenue. We ended up low on federal boarding revenue last year, and it looks like we're going to be low on federal boarding revenue compared to budget again this year. To what extent, we're not sure yet. We haven't had that many collections, but it's something that we're going to keep monitoring. The third one is recorder fees. And right now that's at 23.6% compared to the 37%. And it's about $178,000 behind. Last year at this time, they were at 37.4%. So they were right in that area where we're expecting it. Now, what's happened with the economy? Interest rates have gone up. Housing market has slowed down. I'm showing my heritage. Have slowed down. And so we're not going to see as many transactions going through the recorder's office. It's nothing that we can do anything about. It's just the economy. The next item we have is reimbursements with the courts and juvenile. And we've talked about this previously. This is mainly the reimbursements for juvenile salaries that we get from the state. We're currently about $139,000 behind, and we're at 24.8%. Last year at this time, we're at 25.4%. So everything's anticipated to work out just the way we have it in budget. It's just, this is something that runs slow. And then the last one is our commission other category. And we're at 29.9 at the 37%. And we're behind pace by about 101,000. Last year at this time, we were only at 26.8%. So we're actually doing better than what we were at last year in this category. And when we look at the commission other category, we look at it, it's mainly licenses and permits, which about 62,000 of that's building permits, and another 35,000 of that's inspection fees. So it's a little early in the year for that. We did run a little bit behind on this last year also. So that's really where we're sitting with revenues. Anybody have any questions or want to talk about revenues anymore? Anybody have a story on revenues they want to share? That's okay. We're good. All right, let's move up to expenditures then. Top 5 expenditures. Again, we've touched on these in previous huddles. The first one is commission operations. It's currently $816,000 ahead of pace. Expenditures ahead of pace, not good, but maybe not bad either. Last year at this time, we were about 606 ahead. We're at 43.7% compared to the 37% right now. Last year, we're at 46.3. So when we look at these expenditures, it's really part of it is that we've paid our liability insurance and our building insurance for the year. So it's like almost like when we look at a capital expense and we spend the capital early. This is money that we pay for an annual expense early in the year. And then another part of this is the health department. About 150,000 of it's health department. That's just because we pay them quarterly, and we've gotten 2 quarters done and haven't rode that time frame out. We pay them ahead early in the quarter. And that's really making up the difference for commission operations. Besides, we had an emergency procurement early in the year for chillers for 2 of our buildings, which was about $286,500. And so that's where we're coming up with our expenses being off pace. The next category is sheriff personnel. They're about $373,000 ahead of pace, which is about 35.6% against 34.4% for personnel, number of pay periods we've had this year. Last year at this time, though, they were at 35.9%. So we're in about the same range. And we'll actually talk about personnel a little bit more after the expenditures. We're going to get to Mike's vacancy report that he sends every 2 weeks. The next one is commission operations, and this is for the LEST fund, law enforcement sales tax fund. And we're $295,000 ahead of pace on that. And when we look at that account, the main item in that, out of the 295, 280,000 of that is municipal distributions. So our sales tax has been coming in higher. So we actually give out two-thirds of the sales tax we receive in that is subject to distribution. And we distribute 60% of that two-thirds. And so that's 280 out of that 295. And then the main other difference is that city utilities has changed how they're billing us for our trunk radio system. We were expecting a heavy bill in December, and they, instead of making a heavy bill where we pay the full maintenance fee at the beginning of the year, they've broken it up. And so we ended up saving some money at the end of the year, but we're paying for it now. So it's not like we're spending extra money. It's just they're billing us a little slower than what we anticipated. The next one is sheriff personnel in law enforcement sales tax fund. And they're about 165,000 ahead of pace. And that's at 36.2 compared to the 34.4. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the vacancy sheet. And the last one we have, as far as the major impacts, is $47,000 impact, and that's the assessor operations account. And I think we talked about that 2 months ago, and it's mainly expenditures that they get heavy in the year for sending out statements, printing statements at the beginning of the year, and we don't anticipate being over that. So that's our top 5 categories of expenditures, all things we've talked about. Anybody want to talk about any of these things or any other stories on expenditures or things that you know about? All right, Mike, let's hit the vacancy. Okay, so Mike does this every 2 weeks after payroll posts. And what you can see here is just a comparison to how our payroll is doing compared to budgeted payroll. And so that budgeted payroll does include the budgeted vacancy that we have. So when you look at GR, you'll see that the recorder's office is currently, $186 ahead of pace. And that's mainly because what we figured out is that some changes in insurance on some of the people in their office made it more expensive than what budget is. That number is not growing by much, and we anticipate that when the middle of the year happens, we didn't have the increase in our insurance costs that we thought we would have. And so we really believe that the savings from the budgeted increase is going to take care of the recorder's office. And then when we look at the sheriff, you'll see in GR, we have spending ahead of pace of about $422,000 in GR and $155,000 in LEST. So that's our big challenge there, is that the spending is happening more than what budgeted vacancy is by about $578,000. Now, fortunately, our other offices and departments are helping offset that. So when you look at the total down there for GR, we're only ahead by about $28,000. So while the sheriff has spent more than budget by about $422,000 so far, because the prosecutor has saved about $120,000 and commission saved about $157,000 in GR, and everybody else that's contributing, courts and juvenile by $58,000, we're able to only be about $28,000 down in that. And when we look at LEST, again, the prosecuting attorney is more than making up for what the sheriff is spending right now. Now, the sheriff's thing has been something we've talked about for, I think, every month that we've been doing this. And they've actually been improving their spending a lot. They've put some different policies in place. And while that number's still growing, it's not growing by near what it was. So things are looking better in that area too. Mike, do you want to go down to the commission department so we can hit those real quick? So you see budget is in the red. It's always nice to see somebody leading from, well, the wrong direction. I blame Tina. She left me. We had a large payout. We had one pay period happen and it pretty much halved what our negative was. So we think the next pay period we'll be getting back to close to black. And at that time, we'll probably be able to put out some viewers to start trying to replace her, if you could ever replace Tina. And the other one there is the county administrator. I don't know what Chris's problem is. He's just Chris. No, we actually and made them become an employee. So we have actually a budget adjustment in Chris's hands right now for him to review and sign, and we'll hopefully get that fixed. And that's it for payroll and vacancy. Anybody have any questions or thoughts about the payroll and vacancy? We're all doing a very good job there. It's working out well. So to the page we didn't get to, Mike. So this is know your numbers. And actually, I'd like to hit general revenue last. So if we can scroll on up. So when we look at the overall activity for road and bridge, revenues for road and bridge are about 46% compared to the 37%. What we're mainly seeing there is property tax being collected upfront during the year. So that puts them ahead of pace on revenues. When you look at expenditures, though, they're at 35% compared to the 37%, so they're doing very well there. We've made adjustments for what we've known, and we've done projections for the end of the year. And at the end of the year, we think they will be about $4 million better on revenue. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. About $1.6 million better on revenue, and about $1.6 million better on expenses. So instead of ending the year at $4,373,000 that you see there for changing cash, which was in the budget, current activity is suggesting about $7 million. But when we make the adjustments that we know of and project forward, we think that road and bridge will be about $7.6 million in cash. So they're doing about $3,226,000 better than budget. So that's a very positive sign for road and bridge. Great work. When we look at the assessment fund, on the assessment fund, we thought that we would have about $975,000 less in cash because of the special projects that we're taking on. We have good balances built up there. And so we thought it was about time that some renovations happen. And that's why we have a planned balance of about $975,000 down. As you can see with our activity right now, all of their revenues have been collected, basically. There's some interest, there's some subscription fees, there's some other small revenues that will roll in. And then on expenditures, they're at 31% compared to 37%. And that's even taking into account some of those higher operation expenditures that happen and some of their capital expenses that they've done for the renovations. So their net right now is about $1,465,000 to be good. When we project forward and we look at where they're sitting, we think they're on pace right now to be about $85,000 better than what budget is. It's helping them on the operations side, and that's really about $42,000 better in revenue and $42,000 better in expenses. So we're doing really well in the assessment fund, better than budget. That takes us to law enforcement. Law enforcement, you'll see our revenues and expenditures percentages are pretty close, 40% on revenues, 39% on expenditures. Again, we're looking at 37% as the pace, so we're ahead of pace on revenues and expenditures. Revenues, we think, are going to end about $2.4 million better, and that's mainly because of sales tax. And on expenditures, we think those are going to be about $1.8 million higher than budgeted expenditures. And again, that's mainly because of distributions. And then we have a little bit of salaries on the sheriff's side. It's going to be over budget. But instead of us being $802,000 down in cash, which that was a planned spend down for us because we had more balances in the LEST than what was necessary. So instead of spending more out of GR, we had a heavier spend in law enforcement sales tax. We think that we'll actually have a spend down of about $738,000 without having to do the transfer. So before, law enforcement sales tax was going to be about $1,184,000 down. And then we were going to transfer $381,000 so that we could do the equipment reserve transfers and things that we needed to do. Now we think we're going to be able to do that without a transfer and only be about $738,000 down compared to the $802,000. So we're doing about $64,000 better overall in law enforcement sales tax. So another major account where we're doing better than we thought. And that takes us back to GR. Anybody have any questions on those three funds or comments? Okay. So GR. Revenues are 46%. So obviously, we have property tax in that. We have a higher sales tax coming in. When we project revenues in GR, than what budget is. So 88 million becomes 92 million. When we look at the expenditures, you have the 80,889,000 that you see there, plus savings in budget of $80,150,000 in expenses. When we project forward what we know, we're thinking that we're going to be spending about $80,371,000, which is kind of funny because that's about $215,000 worse. However, the chillers were about $286,500. And that was just an emergency procurement that was unseen in the budget. So actually projecting forward on what our pace is right now, we think we're going to be doing just a little bit better than budget, except for the emergency procurement. And we're actually kind of making up for that a little bit. So with the general revenue, we thought that we'd have revenues in excess of expenditures by almost $8 million, but then we have about $18,157,000 in transfers that we do every year, and most of that is debt service, or setting aside money for future debt service, those two items. So that had a net change in cash of about $10,214,000. We think that we're going to be doing about $4,188,000 better than budget on our change in cash when we project forward and look at what we're doing right now. So that's extremely good news. Out of that $10,214,000, or before the emergency procurement, it was $9,589,000 that we were spending down. $3,364,000 of that was a planned spend down of GR2 balances or 2017 sales tax revenue. So part of that was a planned spend down. That left $6,225,000 that was special one-time money that we had saved from previous periods that the commission was able to allocate towards projects and things in the budget. And so out of our expenditures, $6,225,000 of that, we didn't anticipate being able to replace this next year. However, we have $4,188,000 worth of savings budget in our cash flow that we're projecting right now. So when you look at that, now all of a sudden that $6,225,000 that we weren't going to be able to replace becomes about $2,037,000. So because of how things are going this year, mainly the increases in revenue being about $4 million of it, we are only have about 2,037,000 that's not available for next year's budget, when we were looking at 6,225,000. Now, there's some other adjustments we have to consider when we talk about, how what we're monitoring today and the input you guys give us roll into what we think about next year's budget. One of them is we want to basement minimum. I'm saying that at least $1,000,000. Next year. Anybody here? Nobody from is going to. This year's presidential. So here's budget 318,000. Election meant 17. So the spending at $51,000 budget. We have savings. Surprised about more when you get these other items. Have about $3,008,000 with next year, or at least minimum being included in that potential election difference. $1,188,000. And like I said, spent down at 5 on one-time expense. We have $3,000 in as today. Well, we can have about $10 million. We don't have it. So our situation is much what we expected. We know what to. Anybody have a question about where we are next year, or any comments? Do you try to make projections can rate what we're seeing? Other change is vacant budget vacancy. Budget dollars away from payroll. Pay people. Bring the commission somewhere else. But vacancy going like it based. Obviously, he had there than it was take up the with overtime. I can see every year the current years. So will probably have it. That'll be another spending heavy.
I think vacancy about 25 on it's going, so please be patient with our employees. They're getting around as fast as they can. Normally it takes them about 6 weeks to get through a cycle, but it'll take longer now because less employees, they have larger routes to cover, so they are out there. But
Mike, you want to scroll up and show the vacancy on that? And how many pay periods are we at on this, Mike? Do you know? 9? Okay. So through 8 or 9 pay periods, highway has, oh, I'm sorry, down to the, oh, no, it's there, $589,000 worth of vacancy. And that's not projected through the year. That's just through the first 9 pay periods. And I think Adam was making a comment that the cycle for mowing has to be extended, right?
Right.
So, what is it? I can't remember the number you gave last time. How many weeks is it between mowing in an area?
Well, that's what Crystal was saying. We're probably looking at, maybe close to an 8-week cycle now, as guys run those routes from the time they start to the time they get all the way back around and can repeat that. 8 weeks, it's a long time during peak growing season. So.
Yeah, when it's raining and it's 8 weeks in between mows, can I get away with that at my house? Probably not. But, and that's an example of the impact on the services that Road and Bridge provide. Just think about what challenges Dan's facing with his $312,000 worth of vacancy that his office is having to address, because it can't be easy to keep things going at the pace they need to be going at the prosecutor's office when you have $312,000 worth of vacancy. So vacancy might be good for dollars and cents, but it's not good for operations. And sometimes when you're paying a lot of overtimes, vacancy is not good for dollars and cents either. Anybody else, anything that we're going to talk about? I know it's so nice, 8:39. I'm going to just not, take it to the wire and talk more. It's very rewarding for me. Any announcements? Anything? Okay. Well, if that's it, everybody, thank you for coming. I'm glad we got to talk about some overall big picture things today. Really appreciate your attendance. We'll see you next time.